So, I did want, before we continue on in Lesson 7, there was one particular thing that I failed to mention. Let me just get back in my notes here. That I failed to mention in our lesson on vows, the lesson on vows. So we talked about, just briefly, last time, the idea of rash vows, that rash vows were warned against in the old law, and even on into the wisdom literature and so forth. I know we've talked about this example before, but when we think of rash vows, who kind of comes into our minds maybe almost immediately in the Old Testament? Jephthah. So Jephthah says, if you give me this victory, then I will sacrifice the first thing that comes out to greet me at the door when I come back. And of course, that's his daughter. And it seems that he goes through with that vow. And this was a voluntary thing that he made. He did not have to do this. This was not sanctioned by God. One thing that this has already been covered last quarter. In Leviticus chapter 5, the Lord gave concession that if you gave a vow rashly, without thought, you could offer a sacrifice for that, and that would annul that vow. It seems that Jephthah forgot that particular part of the law. He could have made that sacrifice, been penitent in that, and that would have been forgiven him. And of course, we're in the time of the judges there, so there's a lot of depravity, there's a lot of horrible things that go on there, and things that we don't want to go there for good examples. So I did just want to bring that up, that the Lord, even with rash vows, with thoughtless vows, does give some concessions. So there you have that. I believe that we were in the middle of question 2 here. Those things that merited the death penalty. And I mentioned that I wanted us to go to this piece of narrative, that there's not a whole lot of narrative in the book of Leviticus, but we go over to chapter 24, and starting in verse 16, we see there that there's some of this that plays out here. It says, "And whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall certainly stone him, the stranger as well as him who is born in the land. When he blasphemes the name of the Lord, he shall be put to death." All right? And so from there, we see in the previous context that there is this idea of a mixed marriage that takes place, and I think I'm in, let me make sure, that's okay. Back in verse 10, that's where I want to be. So we see that is given in verse 16, what we've already read, but then verse 10 of 24. "Now the son of an Israelite woman, whose father was an Egyptian, went out among the children of Israel, and this Israelite woman's son and a man of Israel fought each other in the camp." So the first detail that we obviously notice in this particular narrative is we have a mixed marriage, don't we? We have an Israelite and an Egyptian that are in this marriage, and they have this son. There's this fighting in the camp. In verse 11, the Israelite woman's son blasphemed the name of the Lord and cursed. And so they brought him to Moses. His mother's name was Shelomith, the daughter of Dibri of the tribe of Dan. Then they put him in custody, that the mind of the Lord might be shown to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take outside the camp him who has cursed, then let all who heard him lay their hands on his head, and let all the congregation stone him. Then you shall speak to the children of Israel, saying, Whoever curses his God shall bear his sin." And then we again get verse 16, that whoever blasphemes shall be put to death. So this is another piece of, if you do this, death is the penalty. So they get into this altercation. He blasphemes, and the end of the matter is that he is stoned. The thing that I want to note here, and then what is going to happen right after this in some laws that are given. How was this particular person to be put to death? What was the process of that? Okay. Who would do it? The whole congregation would come together to stone this individual. So there is this collective understanding and participation in the doling out of this judgment and of this punishment that God says, you shall not profane my name. In contrast to that, verses 17 and onward talk about a man, one individual that kills another man. And this is that famous section about an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and so forth. So an individual who murders another individual, which is not ordained by God. So we have the congregation killing an individual. That is ordained. This is not. Now this murderer, he is also to be put to death because that is not given by God. So capital punishment in this particular instance was an act of the whole community, while murder by this individual was not ordained by God. So I think that's an interesting contrast. And certainly, again, the big idea that we take away from that is look to what God has sanctioned. In Leviticus 20 and in verse 26, this is something repeated again throughout Leviticus. You shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy and have separated you from the peoples, that you should be mine. The Waldron material gives us this particular quote. When Israel went into Canaan, they would find a profane people. Israel could not be like those people because Israel, Jehovah's people, were a special people. We live in a culture today that celebrates sexual sins across the board. And last time we looked at Leviticus 18 in particular, where a lot of those things are described. It promotes rebellion against authority, whether that be kind of the highest in the land that we think of, or just at home with parents. And that certainly starts in the home. And if they're not getting that teaching at home, that's going to have ripple effects throughout schools, politics, businesses, so on and so forth. And we also, looking back at Leviticus 24, live in a culture that just throws around God's name mixed with profanity. It is blasphemy. They treat it like dirt. They use it commonly. And the point that we must take away, once again, is that we need to be different. We are separate. We are God's people. Anything else on that particular section in terms of the sins listed there in chapter 20 and even 24 there? We'll move on. Yes, sir.
We see a parallel to the laws and the rules that were set up at this time and what we observe today. Anyone who is accused of a crime must have evidence brought against him. He's tried in a court of law. And if the law says that this sin or this crime is worthy of death, then that person is put to death.
Right.
The second thing is that talk about blasphemy against God. Idolatry was a form of blasphemy.
Yeah. There are anything good that we see in our society, whether or not our society wants to admit it or not, comes from God. And I think it's important for us to recognize that too. So that is an excellent point. On that note, in terms of kind of the due process and how they would go about determining whether or not someone has sinned, we come to, this is question number 3, and I've just given you the answers there, haven't I? So we'll just walk through this. I was going to do some of this anyway, because I know this is kind of this is one of those questions I think could have come across this way as like you're trying to read my mind. So it might be more helpful if we kind of just walk through this. So in Numbers 5 here, sin is described as, and I think this is in the ESV, it's described as breaking faith, and I may come back to that here in just a moment. But I ask, what does this passage teach us about our sin in relation to God? How does he view our relationship with him? First of all, in that section in Numbers 5, and let me just get this out here. Does anyone have a different translation of breaking faith? So this would be in verse 6. I'll give you how the ESV reads. Speak to the people of Israel when a man or woman commits any of the sins that people commit by breaking faith with the Lord, and that person realizes his guilt, and so on. Anyone have a different wording there, verse 6? Unfaithfulness, okay. Good. Trespass against the Lord. All right. So this, and I think we can, especially in what's going to go on to be described, this marriage relationship. If you break faith with your spouse, what does that mean in context of what's being talked about here? If you break their trust, break their faith. You broke the covenant in a marriage relationship. How would that manifest itself typically? You could lie, I suppose, which some of that is involved here, but you commit adultery. You're unfaithful, which gets to one of the translations there. You are breaking faith. You make a trespass against your spouse. Yes, sir.
That just kind of struck me when you said it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember in the language of King James when David sinned with Bathsheba, the Lord said, "You have despised my word."
Yeah.
Despised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that too gets to some of what I think the Lord is trying to illustrate here. So there in 5 through 10 of Numbers 5 here, when a man or woman sins, they break faith with the Lord. That exact phrase is found alongside a more specific sin, what we just mentioned, where it says when a wife goes astray and breaks faith with her husband. So there's adultery going on here. And then furthermore, this test for adultery is only to be enacted if what? If the husband suspects. So what does that infer? He suspects, but he doesn't have what? He doesn't have any evidence. He doesn't have any witnesses that this has taken place. But he does suspect something, that he does have reasonable suspicion. If either he hasn't or anyone else has not witnessed this act. The other thing that I would point out is in this context, there's a certain word that appears throughout, and it's the word jealousy. If he has a jealous spirit. I don't know that anyone in the translations we're using is going to translate it this way. But another way, another good word for this type of jealousy would be zealousness. He is zealous towards her. All right? So what kind of jealousy are we talking about? How might we describe that? If this woman has been unfaithful to her husband, does he have a right to be jealous? Absolutely he does. He has a right to be zealous for her. As it happens, and this is one of my favorite stories that we're going to get to a little later on. In Numbers 25, we have Phinehas, who is described as having, so far as I remember, the only person in the Old Testament. I think Paul is described in this way later on, but he's the only one in the Old Testament as described as having the same zeal that the Lord has. He's zealous for the Lord the way that the Lord is zealous for his people. After the sin comes into the camp, he goes through and pierces his spear through the ones that are guilty of the sin, and then the plague stops. That's the sort of jealousy we're talking about. So, all of that taken in, what do you think God is trying to demonstrate with this? This might seem a bit strange to us. She has to drink this dusty water. We might describe it in that way, and there's kind of this maybe weird ritual if we're just reading it. apart from our modern ears. So what do you think God's trying to illustrate with all of that we've talked about? When you sin, yes, sir, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, when we sin, we are effectively breaking faith with God. And this is throughout the prophets, isn't it? It's throughout the Old Testament. God visualizes himself as being the husband to his people, to Israel in this case, and they have broken faith with him. They have committed adultery, spiritual adultery. And so then he is going to act in turn. You have something more there?
No, I think you make a good point. We hear the word jealousy, and we tend to think of that as being, something negative. It can be. It can be an irrational kind of overly suspicious and cruel attitude. But I think we're talking here about what God has a right to expect, what a husband or wife has a right to expect. And this is not condemned. This is, as you said, when the Lord talks about treachery, and that's really what this is about. He's teaching us something about the ultimate loyalty we ought to have to Him.
Yeah.
And how that you can understand how He feels.
Yeah.
We don't see ourselves in our compromises day to day in that light, but that's exactly the way the Lord sees it.
And that's what we have to cement in our minds, isn't it? We have to think how the Lord thinks about our relation. This goes back to one of the phrases that we've seen throughout Leviticus, and that we'll see throughout the rest of the Old Testament. If you do these things, I will be your God, you will be my people. There is this relationship here, but if you break that trust, that faith, there can be no relationship if you continue down this path. One other thing I might point out, it seems to be inferred here that the woman sought to commit this adultery in secret. That's why there's no witnesses, and that's why he has to go through this ritual. Thought that no one would find her out, perhaps. But there is one witness, isn't there? There is one, and it's God. Truth will out, as the saying goes. If you carry out this process, if you're lying, you will be found out. And so there's maybe another lesson for us, that no sin is hidden from the eyes of the Lord. It's all under His watch, and it's all under His care. Anything else, any other point that we might make on that particular chapter and section there? All right, moving into question 4 here. So the Lord has just finished communicating in Leviticus 18 that they were to be set apart from the sexual sins of Canaan. And again, we mentioned there's a couple of other things mentioned, sacrificing children to Molech being one of them, but generally set apart from those sexual sins of Canaan. What types of sins are listed in Leviticus 19 that they would inevitably encounter in Canaan? And if you're able to kind of just generally categorize some of the things that are talked about there, that's what we're looking for. So what do you have for that?
We're going to encounter poor people when they have regulations for taking care of them.
Yes. All right. Good. Let's get one more, and then maybe we can start to piece some of these together. So treat the poor with kindness. Treat them with care. What's another one? Idolatry. Okay, good. What else?
Stealing, swearing falsely,
Yeah.
cruelty.
What does some of those remind us of? Stealing, blaspheming,
Commandments.
10 Commandments, right? Is bringing that into the equation again. I'll pause here for just a moment. This is something I ran across that I thought was interesting. I think we can notice at some level as we read throughout, there's a lot of repetition in the law and so forth. Here in chapter 19, after the phrase, I am the Lord, in verse 3, there are 21 laws that follow that phrase. That's 7 times 3. 7, 7, 7. This kind of, we've studied numerology before. That's kind of this whole number from God. It's ordained by God. And then we see again at the end of verse 18, we have, I am the Lord, something that resembles that. 21 more laws follow. So I think there's repetition there for a reason to say this is what will make you whole, this is what will make you holy. I am the Lord, I am holy, you also must be holy. All right? Let's see here. So, of course, 19 and verse 2 should remind us of a passage in the New Testament. In 1 Peter chapter 1, 15 through 16, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord, your God, am holy. That's just another point if somebody says, why are we studying Leviticus and the old law? Well, the holy apostles seem to think it was important, so that seems to be a pretty good idea. So we could list that passage along with many others. One other thing with the Ten Commandments, what is mentioned in verse 3 again? We've already talked about this, but what's mentioned again?
Honor thy father and thy mother is a commandment, and it's repeated here in verse
Yes,
3.
right. So another one of the Ten Commandments repeated. And in the context of you do not act like the land that you're going into, the first thing he says is, honor your father and mother. That's telling. And we're living in Canaan today in a lot of ways. We need to remember that also. Even the things that maybe we consider to not be as significant. It is very significant. So we've already mentioned, don't steal, don't lie, don't swear by God's name, treat the poor with respect. How might we categorize those types of sins if we were to kind of bundle them into one phrase? We're going to see it later in chapter 19, by the way. Maybe there's a certain verse we might use.
Heading I have over that is love your neighbor as yourself.
There you go. That should sound familiar to our ears also, shouldn't it? When we come into the New Testament, into the Gospels, this is how Jesus would speak. So don't take vengeance, but love your neighbor as yourself. And that would be Matthew 22 in particular. All right, that covers that section pretty well. Then we come to how I've heard it described, kind of the weird section of the law. And I'll put that in air quotes. We have, and let's see, let's get to exactly the section I'm talking about here. This is still within 19. Let's see. Starting around verse 20, 23 or so, what are some of the things that are mentioned in that section? It might seem kind of random to us at first. When it comes to, let's say, cattle, what are they not to do? Right. Can't breed cattle with a different kind. What about when you're sowing a field and you're planting seed? What can you not do? Can't plant two kinds of seed. It must be one type of seed. What about the type of clothes that someone would wear? What kind of thread are they supposed to use? One type. Can't mix. Don't eat the blood is also mentioned in here. Life is in the blood. As it happens, that'll be mentioned later on with this kind of council meeting in Acts 15 when it says you still, as Gentiles, you stay away from these things. So that's maybe another thing we can point to. Why do we not eat the blood today? Well, first of all, because we don't need to eat the blood. But I think there's also some other lessons that we're meant to learn there. And then he also said, or the passage here in Leviticus 19 also says, don't get this certain type of haircut, don't get these tattoos. What kind of picture is God trying to paint with all of these weird laws? Why does God care so much about how one cuts their hair, about the types of seed that someone plants, about the types of clothes that they wear in this context. What do you think?
They're to be set apart from
Yeah.
people in Canaan.
It's just that they can't miss the lesson, can they? Do not mix these things together. And I've heard so many, kind of skeptics and atheists and agnostics, they go to these passages and say, look how ridiculous the old law was. And like, by the way, y'all don't do this today. So what's the deal? You pick and choose what you want to get from God's word. There's a few things I think we can note from this passage. First of all, again, the reason that they are to follow these things is because God is Lord. He is Yahweh. He is Jehovah. But secondly, as Ryan pointed out, as we've already talked about, they're to be separate. They're to be different from the nations they encounter. And then one other thing, we've already talked about this with the feast days, that literally every single day of their calendar year, they were to be making offerings. This is constantly on their mind. Some sort of offering, some sort of sacrifice. Here, God continues to make comments about how they are to live their lives, about what they eat, how they harvest their fields, how they interact with their family, their parents, how they interact with their neighbors, how they deal with an employer or a slave. He comments about the clothing they put on, how they breed their cattle, how you get a haircut, or how you get these tattoos or these markings. As we'll see in Deuteronomy, he even comments about how you're to take care of your own waste. That might seem crude to us. But the point of it is, I think, does it sound like God has not commented, or God has commented on, let me back up. What has God not commented on in their daily life? Not a thing, it seems. As we'll get to here in just a moment, I think we'll get there, maybe just a little bit. Even how you sleep, how you wake up, how you travel, all these things God has commented on. So what we don't want, this is for us, what we don't want to do in our modern minds is say, that was them, this is now, we don't have to concern ourselves with such things. We may not be under all the specific laws that are talked about here. Though, as I mentioned, some of them we are. Life is in the blood and so forth. But does God still care about every single choice that we make? He absolutely does. We need to be thoughtful. We need to be careful about the choices we make, how we spend our time, not just in the assembly. We spend most of our time outside of this assembly. But it's how we work, how we play, what we choose to take part in with entertainment. I think that it's important for us to begin to separate, or to begin to eliminate, should I say, the word and the phrase secular life. Nothing is secular in the life of a Christian. Everything is spiritual. And we need to be thinking in spiritual terms. God may not care about, for instance, sports in the way that we're saying, like God doesn't care about football. Maybe not in the way that we're talking about it, but he still cares about how we interact with that, how we treat one another, how we react, all of those things, and how much we invest. I could continue on there, but I'll pause, stop there. Anything else on, I forgot to throw the chart up here, but anything else on that particular question and point? Yes, sir.
Just to say, what we're saying is then that the regulations that God gave in the Old Testament, some of them we might see a practical, for lack of a better term, application. Some of them are merely symbolic, but none of them, in essence, are weird.
Yeah.
That's a term that the world uses.
That's right.
Because they don't get it. It might seem unusual to us, but the more we know and the closer we get to the light, the more we see, okay, this is what he's teaching. Mm-hmm. This is why this is good. And he's, as you point out, he still does. There's still regulations in the New Testament, some of which we might say, well, there's no scientific basis for this. This is somewhat God's choice. Mm-hmm. Yes, God has chosen this behavior in order to teach this lesson. Mm-hmm. And it's not mine to critique that, it's mine
That's
to
right.
obey it and to try to learn the lesson from it. And so, yeah, that's, this section of Leviticus really is quite rich. It might seem strange to somebody not initiated, but the more we look at it, the more we understand, oh yeah, I need that lesson.
Yeah. I hope that we've seen so much of the value of Leviticus. We're really going to move out of the book now at this point. But it is so rich, as Wes just said. And I think the more that you read it, the more that you dig into it, we can see just how valuable it still is for us today. It is a rich book. Anything else before we move on? All right, we have a few minutes left, so let's just break into Lesson 8 here. So this is moving into what we call the book of Numbers. So chronologically now, we are in the first day of the second month in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt. That's Numbers 1 in verse 1. The Waldrons note that what transpires in this chapter took place between the regular observance of the Passover, that would be the 14th day of the first month of the second year, and the observance in the second month by those unclean in the first month. So that provision that's made in the law there. So what takes place in this chapter here in Numbers chapter 1, as has been the case in Leviticus, other parts of Numbers that we've looked at already, this is all to prepare God's people as they enter into the promised land. That's still the goal, always has been, and it continues on. So looking at question 1 here, and this may be as far as we get, we'll see how many are counted in this census that we see here in chapter 1, and who is the census made up of? We'll answer question 2 here in just a moment. But first of all, how many and who is the census made up of?
603,550
Yes.
plus the Levites.
Plus, yes. And, all right, so who is counted in this number? Men 20 and above. Those of fighting age, we might say. And Miss Donna noted plus the Levites, because the Levites are not counted in this number. We'll get to that a little later in this lesson and even in some other lessons. But this gets to the second part of the question. Well, let's get to that in just a moment. It is interesting that in the middle of this numbering, who, if you can kind of find, if you've got paragraphs in your Bible or maybe you've already made a note of it, who is the largest tribe at this point in the history of Israel? It's Judah, isn't it? Judah, far and away, even with Joseph's 2 tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, is not able to compare to Judah's number. They have the largest amount of men. So we're continuing to see clues, we're continuing to see this continuation that Judah is the one through whom the Messiah will come. That he is most blessed, elevated above all these other tribes. And we want to note that as we go throughout. So the men are counted, so that's excluding women, children, older men, so that means they've got far more than 603,550. But they are all those who will go to war. What war are we talking about? Why war? They're going to have to fight. Have you ever thought about this? Did God have to use Israel to fight when they entered the land, to take the land? Couldn't he have just, like the plagues in Egypt, couldn't he have just sent plagues in and wiped out all of the inhabitants? Couldn't he have had some show of force like the Red Sea back there in Exodus? Couldn't he have just snapped his fingers and done something there? What do you suppose he's trying to do with his people? Yes, sir.
He's made a nation of these people. He's given them laws. They have some responsibility for what they do and what they are supposed to accomplish.
Yes.
It isn't just a sit back, just walk in, move into somebody else's house and expect that the people before you could just move out.
Yeah.
They had responsibility.
Yeah.
He's testing them with this.
Yeah. Responsibility, testing. Yes, sir.
Trust.
Trust. What's another word we might use for that? He's building what in them?
Faith.
Faith. He's cultivating faith, faithfulness, loyalty, that they're going to fight for what God has promised them. And by the way, if they have been faithful to God, and if they go in and they fight for the land, we see, and this is getting into next quarter in a lot of ways, they won't suffer any loss, will they? I think it's, this may be next lesson, but in the curses and blessings, the Lord says, if you're faithful to me, one man will chase 100. That's exactly what happens when they enter the land. We think about Gideon, even in the time of the Judges, which is a horrible time in the history of God's people. But even then, when we have glimpses of faithfulness, that God is faithful to His promises. So I think that's an important point we might make. God is cultivating faithfulness in His people. All right. Any other comments there on that particular question? All right, we've got a couple minutes here, so let's see what we can do. Numbers chapter 2 describes the arrangement of the tribal camps. How would this organization affect travel and worship? We may have to wait on that particular actual question for next time. But they were to camp around the tabernacle, be right there in the middle, each man under the standard of his tribe with the banners of his own family. And we have the positions of each tribe that are given by God, as are their marching orders for when they pick up camp, when they move out. On the east side, which is going to be the bottom portion on this particular image, we have the encampment of Judah, which also includes Issachar and Zebulun, and that totals to 186,400. This would always be the first tribe to move out. So again, we see some elevation there with the tribe of Judah. They are the first to move out. Then we have the camp of Reuben, which would include Simeon and Gad. From there, the tabernacle would move next, along with the Levites. We'll get to some of the Levites a little later on. The west, which would be the camp of Ephraim, also include Manasseh and Benjamin. The northern encampment of Dan, which would include Asher and Naphtali. So let's just go ahead and quickly answer this question then. How would this organization affect travel and worship? Again, this is a little bit of mind reading, but is this orderly or disorderly?
I was going to say, this is an orderly
Yeah.
way to travel.
Exactly. Each family, not just each clan, not just each tribe, but everyone knew their place. They knew where they were supposed to camp. They knew when they were supposed to pick up camp. They knew when they were supposed to put down camp. Quickly set up, quickly take down. And they were also encamped around what? The tabernacle. What would be above the tabernacle? The cloud, God's presence, the ark, the mercy seat. All of this reminding them that God is with them. They can't miss these things. And all of those things would be so important for them moving forward. All right, we'll have to stop there. We may mention a couple of other things before we get into question 3. But I do have more lessons in the back. Actually got 3 lessons back there this time. So if you could pick those up and prepare accordingly. Thank you.